We've been focusing on community, as I said, a central theme of today's meeting, and I think a fitting follow-up to Amy, who is a community builder. Mr. Ron Richard, our speaker today, himself is a community builder. It's my pleasure to introduce Mr. Ronald Richard, who retired in 2023 after 20 years as the president and CEO of the Cleveland Foundation, our nation's oldest community foundation. Under Ron's leadership, the foundation's endowment and grant-making doubled, and their fundraising increased a remarkable 600%. Prior to joining the Cleveland Foundation, Ron was managing director and COO of InQtel, the CIA's venture capital fund. And Ron also spent 13 years in key management positions at Panasonic and began his career as a U.S. Foreign Service officer serving in Japan and at the Department of State. In his retirement, Ron and his wife Bess, who is here with us today as well, split their time between Cleveland and Chautauqua and Ron serves on numerous boards, including the University Hospital Board of Trustees, the board of Case Western Reserve University, and Chautauqua Institution Board of Trustees. There's much more I'm sure I could have mentioned, but I'll let Ron introduce himself and offer some remarks. So Ron, will you please come forward? Thank you so much.
Good. Hello, everyone. It's great to be here. I'm very honored and pleased to be here. I'm especially pleased because I was asked to talk about community building today, and it's actually something I know a little bit about. You have no idea how many times I was asked to give talks about things I knew nothing about, but it never stopped me. Building community, in my view, it's not just nice and fun. It's really essential to our domestic tranquility, our joy as Americans, our economy, and even our national security. And when you say community, we always think of the Jamestown community, the Chautauqua County community, the Buffalo community, but there's all kinds of communities. There's the intelligence community, the medical community, the legal community, et cetera, et cetera. And building community in all of them is extremely important. I've seen the positive results of successful community building, and I've seen the tragic results of a lack of harmonious community building in my career. I only have 15 minutes today to talk, so I'll try to be as brief as I can, and I won't be able to go into much detail, but I'm happy to answer questions at the end on any topic. I'd just like to go over my career very quickly and talk about community building in each phase of my kind of bizarre career. As you heard, I started out, my wife Bess is here. We began our careers as U.S. Foreign Service officers. And for those of you who don't know that term, a lot of Americans don't, it just means U.S. diplomats stationed overseas in our embassies representing the United States. We were in Japan mostly. We're also at the State Department in Washington, D.C. I was on the North Korea desk and the Greek and Turkey desk. My wife was on the France desk. And my job overseas was to uphold the defense and foreign affairs and intelligence relations that we had, in this case with Japan, because we spent most of our time in Japan, and with the other East Asian allies of the United States. The efforts of the U.S. government were largely successful, in my view, at keeping the balance of power in East Asia and in Europe through the efforts of our friends and colleagues that were serving in that theater of the world as opposed to East Asia. But we had to constantly work at it. Democracies elect new leaders. We had new people we had to make friends with, try to influence, to promote U.S. interests. We had to build community for national security reasons. We have naval bases and Air Force bases all over. We had to make sure we had good community relations to back up our military, while at the same time often competing economically, with Japan and other countries in the world. So they were allies, but also competitors, and that was a difficult balance at times. I left the State Department in 2008 to join Panasonic, which was at the time the second largest company in Japan, just after Toyota, and it was the 11th largest company in the world. It was a big company. We had 350,000 employees. in almost every country in the world. And we did about, at that time, way back then, $85 billion a year in sales, which was a time when $85 billion was a lot of money. It was a wonderful experience for me. I was almost always the only non-Japanese in the room because it's a Japanese company. So I was the senior American, and for 13 years, most of my days I was the only American in a room full of much older Japanese guys, trying to convince them that in the United States we need to do it this way. It's not going to work the way you do it in Japan. And I have lots of hilarious stories about that, but I don't have time to tell you today. People think about consumer electronics. Panasonic, of course, made TV sets and 90 other kind of products. You think about, people don't really think too much about what goes into consumer electronic products. Of course, you probably imagine that you have to build a factory, and you have to put machines in the factory, and you have to train people how to work those machines. You have to design those machines and build those machines. But really the most important thing in the consumer electronics industry is, sounds very boring, is the standardization process. So what does that mean? When you make, in the old days, this will date me, VCRs, or CD players or DVDs, you can't have Toshiba, Sony, Fujitsu, Panasonic, all making different form factors. The CD that you stick into one has to work with the other company's players as well. So you have to get together, all these companies and decide, what's the size of the CD going to be? How are we going to have interoperability so that all of our products, because consumers don't want to buy a Sony DVD player and find that, they can't put their Panasonic DVDs in it. So we had to negotiate that, and it was hard because every company had some intellectual property rights. So everyone wanted their standard to be the standard because they'd get more royalties from it, right? So there was a lot of give and take, but we all knew that we had to get in a room and come up with a solution, or the whole market wouldn't come to be. No one would be able to sell any products. And so I remember having to fly to Chicago on a snowy Sunday morning to kind of mediate this huge meeting of 60 players to try to finally come up with the final standard for DVDs, and we accomplished that. And it was a wonderful thing, because now we can all enjoy DVDs. So you had to have a community that cared about each other and understood that everybody needed to compromise. The same was true with semiconductors. Panasonic was a huge producer of semiconductors. My boss was the chairman of the Japanese Semiconductor Industry Association, a very powerful, important group, as you can imagine. And I supported him in his work to create standards for ASIC chips and all the kind of things that we had. And I'm sure there's a lot of standards work going on right now for artificial intelligence chips, because they have to work in everybody's product too. So that was I was in the corporate world, but I did a lot of community building there. I left Panasonic to join the CIA's Venture Capital Fund as Managing Director and Chief Operating Officer. So you might be thinking, what the heck does the CIA need a venture capital fund for? And I'll tell you very quickly the origins, because it's kind of interesting. So I came to work for the CIA because my college buddy, George Tenet, grew up to be the head of the CIA. And he called me one day and said, I need you to quit your job at Panasonic and come work for me. I was the number 2 at Panasonic for North America, and knew that I'd probably become the next president and CEO. And I was like, I don't know, George, I'm in a pretty good position here. And he's like, we really need you, your country needs you, you gotta come do this. And what he explained to me was that technology was moving so fast that the CIA couldn't keep up with it. The CIA had always been ahead of everybody in technology. I don't know, do you remember the BlackBerry? Did anyone have a BlackBerry? Okay, before there were iPhones. The CIA invented that. They invented it so that our spies in Russia could communicate with encryption with the CIA without having to have physical meetings where the KGB could follow them and arrest them. So they could stay at home and pass on the intelligence to us. Like 20 years before the BlackBerry came out, the CIA was using BlackBerries. Of course, they were like $1 million a pop, so if they gave you one, they said, better not lose this, because you'll be paying for it through your retirement funds for the rest of your life. But I left to join it, and George went to Congress because he felt like the federal acquisition regulations, the FAR, made it so slow to get technology into the CIA. Even getting Microsoft Office took like 18 months. And George was so worried that our enemies were, creating technology. We had to speed up technology, especially to catch terrorists before they had a terrorist attack on the US. And so we got Congress to give $25 million to a nonprofit 501c3 organization called In-Q-Tel. Therefore, it didn't have to worry about the federal acquisition regulations. And it was like an evergreen fund. They would invest in technologies that could really help the CIA, and they could do it really quickly because this was a totally independent operation. It didn't have to work at government speed. It could work at our speed. And we could get these technologies. And then as those companies that we invested in, went public or whatever, we would make a lot of money off the stock we got. And it was an evergreen fund. We could use that to invest in others. And CIA has been super, super successful. I don't know if you've ever read Dan Brown's books, the Da Vinci Code and whatnot, but his newest book called The Enemy of Enemies, is that right, Beth? The Secret of Secrets. She's read it, I haven't. But a huge part of that book talks about In-Q-Tel and the role that it played in this spy novel. So go get that for Christmas. Anyway, to give you an example of how that worked, we were told by the CIA, we need a technology that if we know one bad guy, we can link him to others. So if there's a network of them, we want to be able to find out the whole network. So find us a technology that can do that. So we would scour the whole world and look for technologies. And we actually found one in Las Vegas. There was a company called NORA, N-O-R-A, which stood for Non-Obvious Relationship Analysis. And some guy in a garage with a couple of buddies developed this software for the casino industry. They went to the casinos and said, we think you're getting ripped off, not by card counters, because you know how to catch card counters. We think people who work for you, the blackjack dealers, are letting their roommates come in and they're, letting them win. And we're so sure of it that we'll give you the software for 6 months. And if you don't catch a lot of people, no charge. But if you do, we want $1 million a year for our software. So this one casino, MGM Grand, took the bait. And what they did is, when they hired someone as a blackjack dealer or whatever, they would make them fill out, what is the account number on your water bill, your electric bill, your gas bill, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And then when someone won more than $10,000 to get their money at the casino, they had to fill out the same form. And they were shocked at how many people were living with someone who won. And so every casino now uses that. Well, we took that idea and said, what if we took that and we entered in this massive database of everyone who'd ever flown on a US airliner or taken a train or rented a car, et cetera, and everyone who came here on a visa, how would that work? And we were pretty sure that if we had a terrorist attack, this was before 9/11, and we knew 9/11 was going to happen. George Tenet was running around with his hair on fire that entire summer saying, we're going to get hit, we see the chatter, in our intelligence. And so we went to the FBI and we said, okay, we put all the known terrorists into this database, but we need your list of known terrorists. And the FBI wouldn't give it to us. So that was a failure of the intelligence community. They wouldn't give it to us because the CIA had a notorious mole, Aldrich Ames, who gave up a lot of intelligence, including FBI secrets. CIA didn't trust the FBI because they had Robert Hanssen, the worst spy in the history of the United States. He was in charge of counterintelligence for the US, but working for the Russians. And so they didn't trust each other, so they wouldn't give us, you know, their list. Well, 9/11 was a day I'll never forget. I worked in Roslyn, Virginia, directly next to the Pentagon. And as my team and I were watching the TV, because we'd heard about New York and watching the smoking, you know, ruins of the trade towers, we were in one of the 2 trade towers in DC. There's 2 large towers, like the Twin Towers in New York City, right next to the Pentagon, the Gannett News Building. And we were on the top floor. And we were watching on TV, and all of a sudden our building started to shake. And we looked out the window, and the wing of the plane that hit the Pentagon probably missed our building by 2 feet. Shook the whole building, and then we watched it hit the Pentagon. And when it hit the Pentagon, we thought a nuclear bomb was on it because there was like a fiery cloud that looked like Hiroshima. But quickly we realized it went black, and we realized it was just the fuel burning off. Anyway, it was like being at Pearl Harbor, you know, in 1941. Everyone was running everywhere. I told all my people, get your intelligence stuff in the safes, lock your safes, and go home. I drove over to the CIA to see if I could help George Tenet just as everyone was being evacuated, and it was total mayhem. I'll never forget that. Well, of course, the next day, I got on the phone to the FBI. Now are you willing to give us your terrorist information? We only knew the name of one of the terrorists, Mohammed Atta. When we got the FBI information and we put it into the NORA system, within 24 hours, we knew all 19. That's how we knew so quickly, all 19. They were all connected. Because 2 years earlier, Mohammed Atta had come with 2 other people, and they'd rented a car, and they'd been on a plane trip together, so we connected them with that. And then one of them was connected to 2 others, and it went like that. So, again, that's the tragic example of when communities aren't harmonious and they don't work together, and why it's so important that the intelligence community works together. Then I left to join the Cleveland Foundation, which, as was mentioned, is the oldest community foundation in the world, and its establishment's kind of interesting. So it was established by Frederick Harris Goff, the greatest community builder in the history of the country. No one's ever heard of him, probably. He was John D. Rockefeller's lawyer. As you know, John D. Rockefeller started Exxon, Standard Oil, in Cleveland. But he moved it in 1914 to New York City. Are you ready for this? Why did he move it to New York City? For lower taxes. It's the best joke of the day, right? So he moved it for lower taxes, and he asked the company's general counsel, Fred Goff, to come with him. But Goff's wife said, Fred, Cleveland needs you more than New York. Please stay here. So he stayed, and he was promptly offered to be the president of a bank that was about to go out of business, called Cleveland Trust Bank, which now is known as Key Bank, which you may have heard of. It's one of the top 5, I think, in the country. He turned it around very, very quickly, and it became a super successful bank. I just wish he was alive today and could take over the Browns, but he's not. He noticed that he had a problem at the bank. And he called this problem the dead hand of philanthropy problem. People would die and leave their money for something that had become obsolete. And because the money was in trust to the bank, they couldn't spend that money for anything else at a time when Cleveland had so many needs. They had all these immigrants, a lot of great growth and opportunities, but they couldn't fund opportunities or problems, a lot of social service issues, because this money was tied up. So a good example was some woman died, she liked horses, and she left money to make sure that the horse troughs on Euclid Avenue, our main street, were always at fresh water. Well, 1914 came along, and there were no horse troughs on Euclid Avenue, but he couldn't spend the money for anything except horse troughs. So he said, this doesn't make any sense. We should have a flexible community foundation, where people can leave their money. We'll hire like mini experts in education, social services, arts and culture, environmental, parks and recreation, workforce, economic development, like mini professors, if you do that, subject matter experts. You can leave your money to the foundation, and for the rest of time, they'll adapt with the times. They'll always fund the most important things now. So he started the Cleveland Foundation. And then he was like Johnny Appleseed. He went to New York City and talked to banker friends and started the New York Community Trust, then the Buffalo Foundation, then the Chicago Community Trust, then the LA Community Foundation, then the San Francisco Community Foundation. There are now 980 some community foundations in the country and 1,800 in the world. He actually went overseas to start some. And so he really created the community foundation movement. Cleveland Foundation now has $4 billion. We were able to give out about $200 million a year. We played a huge role. I don't know how well many of you know Cleveland, but we have one of the most beautiful park systems in the country. It's called the Emerald Necklace. There are 20 parks all around Cleveland, all because of the Cleveland Foundation. The Cleveland Foundation played major parts, a major role in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, in the Art Museum, in the orchestra, in helping the hospitals, Cleveland Clinic, University Hospitals, Metro Health Hospitals. We fund every after-school arts program, education program, training for people going into the trades, free scholarships for college. The Cleveland Foundation, when I was there, gave a single check for $30 million to the public school system, and then I raised as chairman another $50 million so that we could announce that every child who graduated from Cleveland Public Schools for the future would have free college of their choice or free trade school of their choice. We'd pay for it because that money would build over time and we'd have enough. And so countless kids that never would have had a chance to go to college could do that. We started high school science and medicine. Countless kids are doctors now that never would have gone to college because they got free college and free med school. And so the Community Foundation in Cleveland has played a huge role, just as it does in every other city and county and region that has them. Plays just a huge role in creating community. I will close, I don't go over my time, which I probably already did, by just saying that I think community building has never been more important. I hate to say this because Bess and I are from Washington, D.C. It's our hometown. Some people are actually from there, and not many of us, but some of us are. And D.C. is so dysfunctional, it has been for decades, that really a lot of the progress that's occurred in this country has really been at the local level. Whether it's Silicon Valley coming up with new inventions, or Boston with new medical inventions, or the Midwest cities with still great industrial power. A lot of progress is coming at the local level, where people live next to each other and don't vilify each other because you're neighbors and you got to work together and you do work together, and you plow each other's driveways if someone's sick and can't do it or whatever. And I just think that our nation is, we have so much going for us, but at the same time we have so many problems that we need to solve, and we can solve, but we're not going to solve them, if Congress is just political gamesmanship situation. We really at the local level have to put more pressure on them to roll up your sleeves and just work together and fix our problems. The rate of, we all know this, it's so shocking to read, the rates of drug use are just off the charts. And with all the debate about, these firing at these ships, off the coasts, whether you think that's terrible or you think it's great, like, why isn't anybody talking about the demand side? Everyone's talking about, we got to wipe out the suppliers of drugs, and certainly we have to stop drugs from coming here. But why do so many people want to take drugs? I mean, there's something lacking in community when people are so lonely that they feel that they have to turn to drugs. And I think the rate of depression, the rate of suicide, teen suicide, food insecurity, housing insecurity, lack of access to medical care. You know, we have all these problems that are so sky high, which can be fixed, but only if we work together. And so, you know, I think that the real root of the problem is the breakdown of American families and American communities. Lincoln said, "A house divided cannot stand." Ben Franklin said, "We must all hang together or we'll hang separately." Americans need to find a way to come together and work together and solve problems and seize on the wonderful new opportunities we have, like AI, which will be very problematic in some areas, like loss of employment, but could be great in other areas, like gaining employment in whole new industries. And so I hope we'll do that. The good news is that this country is not nearly as divided as people in the media would have you believe. A friend of mine started a wonderful group called Better Angels. It's a really interesting group, and what they do is they take diehard Republicans and diehard Democrats, and they put them together for a weekend, groups of 12. And they have found, they've done this all over the country, and they talk to them going in, and they film it, and I've seen the films, and people are like, I view the other side as the enemy, I view the other side as immoral, I view the other side as traitors, you know. And after 2 days together, they come out and say, you know, they're really good human beings. We disagree on some things, but understanding their life experiences, I know where they're coming from. I don't agree with them, but they're not evil. They're good people, and we're going to keep up after this weekend. You know, a lot of great friendships have come from that. Like 98% of the people who've gone through these programs, which has now been over 100,000 people, have come out saying, this is ridiculous. We like shared 90% of our views. It's only a few things we disagree on, and at least I understand their point of view, and it's not coming from a place of evil, it's just coming from a different life experience. So, you know, that's very encouraging to me, and so I don't think we're as divided, but of course the media makes a lot of money from getting people angry and more clicks and all this kind of stuff. So I think that's the good news for the holidays for you, is that we're not as divided as we think. So I think with that, I'm going to end. I'm very happy to take questions on anything at all. And again, it's been a real honor and pleasure to be with you guys today. Thank you.